All right, it's 1:06. Shall we get started, everyone? Okay, everyone's giving me the nod. Hello, welcome to a session on how do we care for our parents as they age. This is being presented jointly by AARP and NAAAP. So today we'll be talking about the questions that we have about multi-generational households, especially in the midst of these uncertain times. And in partnership with AARP, we'll be discussing how we can prepare ourselves while understanding that caring for family members can involve navigating family expectations, cultural expectations, and even personal expectations. We have three great panelists today and an opening remarks from Vice President for Multicultural, Ms. Daphne Kwok. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence and nearly 38 million members, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters to them to most families and most to families: health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. AARP also produces the nation's largest circulation publications, AARP the magazine and AARP Bulletin. By providing ongoing and accessible and up-to-date information and resources for the community, AARP looks to find new ways to provide continued care and support for the AAI community. So we'll be sharing with you some resources about AARP as well as caregiving and caring for parents. But without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our co-host, Ms. Daphne Kwok.
Thank you so much, Cyndy. I'm actually going to turn it immediately over to my colleague, Dr. Ni-Quartelai Quartey. He has to leave in a few minutes because he's actually speaking on another panel. So, Ni-Quartelai?
Thank you, Daphne, and thanks to everybody for joining this webinar. I'm Dr. Ni-Quartelai Quartey, and I have the good pleasure of working very closely with Daphne Kwok and so many other members at AARP as our senior advisor and national LGBTQ liaison. I am honored to have been invited to briefly say hello to you all and to so into what's going to be an incredible conversation about how we can prepare ourselves to care for our parents and our loved ones as we age. My hope, my intention is to really inject sort of an LGBTQ consciousness into this work. As we also think about, what it looks like to inject a racial justice consciousness into our work. We are folks that are the sum of many parts. We're the sum of many parts, and just as AARP is striving to meet folks where they're at, I suspect that NAAAP is doing the same. There is a learning theorist that I am deeply inspired by. Some of you might have read some of his work, Peter Senge. And Peter Senge is the author of one of my favorite books from grad school, The Fifth Discipline. And in that book, Peter writes about transformation. And he says that transformation happens when we're willing to begin to re-examine some of our underlying assumptions. I'll say that again. Peter Senge says that transformation happens when we're willing to begin to re-examine some of our underlying assumptions. So as we think about our caregiving work, as we talk about our caregiving work, as we strive to find tips, tools, and resources to help us show up in our families as caregivers, I want us to think a little bit about what support different caregivers of different backgrounds may need. There's a lot of work, there's a growing body of work that AARP is doing in support of the LGBTQ community with a consciousness around AAPI LGBTQ older adults. There are resources that we've developed. I would urge you to check out our LGBTQ Prepare to Care Guide. It is a very popular and very helpful caregiving guide that includes checklists and includes insights, valuable insights that help us to be more sensitive and more aware of some of the unique challenges and opportunities that exist to support our LGBTQ loved ones as caregivers or as people being cared for. Of course, we can't do this work alone. And that's why hopefully this is the beginning of a number of webinars that we do together. But we've worked very closely with organizations like NAAAP, the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. Here at AARP, we believe in building a longer table of partners, in which case NAAAP, under the leadership of Glenn McPentie, has been an incredible partner to help make sure that we're developing content and we're flexing our advocacy muscle with the needs of AAPI LGBTQ older adults front and center. And so I see this as sort of the beginning of a conversation and a conversation that I'm excited to be a part of, along with the leadership of Daphne Kwok. And so fasten your seatbelt and prepare for a really dynamic conversation that features a couple champions from AARP that have really allowed our LGBTQ work to skyrocket. Allies like Daphne Kwok and Erwin Tan have been incredible to this effort when it comes to our research work, when it comes to our information materials, when it comes to who we partner with, and when it comes to how we think about the future. And so with that, I want to hand it back to Daphne, and I want to say, have a great, great, great conversation.
Thank you, Ni-Quartelai. And Cyndy just put into the chat box our LGBT guide for Prepare to Care. So all of you can download it. It's for free and it's a really very useful piece. But I just want to say welcome to all of you that have joined us today, this afternoon. AARP so pleased to be able to start this partnership with NAAAP. Hopefully that we can be a resource and to be able to help all of you navigate through life. We've had some wonderful conversations with your leadership. Most recently, Ni-Quartelai and I had a conversation with Keith and John to see how we can help support the NAAAP Pride group. So as we move into 2021, we're looking forward to helping and assisting there. I'm just going to kick it off by throwing out a few stats, and then after that, really want to turn it over to my colleagues. You're very fortunate to have Erwin and Isabel today. They are just a wealth of information. Every time they speak, I learn so much from them as well too. But I just want to put out there that do any of you know, and you can just think about it, I wish it could be more interactive, but do any of you know how many people turn 65 years old every single day in the United States? And if we were doing this live, I actually have goodies that I give out to anyone who comes close to the right answers. But it's actually 10,000 people turn 65 every single day in the United States. That's a staggering number. And so as you know, AAPIs are part of that as well too. And as we talk about caregivers, I wanted to just throw out, what percentage of caregivers do you think are males? What percentage of caregivers do you think are males? This might be busting stereotypes, but it's actually 40%, nearly 40% of caregivers are males. So that just sort of changes our conversation as well. And another stat that I like to put out there, because it really blows everybody's mind, is what percentage of caregivers do you think are millennials? Millennials. And that's a quarter. A quarter of all caregivers are millennials. And you probably wouldn't think of young people being caregivers, but it is already a staggering number as well. In the US, there are about 4.3 million AAPIs that are over the age of 50 plus. And in 40 years, that number is going to jump to 13.2 million. So as we help everybody in the AAPI community go through our life cycle, we hope to be able to be a resource. And in this whole caregiving arena, we very much believe that this is where AARP can help assist, help have those and start those difficult conversations. And we have quite a few resources that we'll be sharing with you as well. So thank you so much, and we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Daphne. So let me take this moment to first thank our speakers for being here today and give you just a little preview of what you're in store for. So our speakers include Dr. Erwin Tan and Miss Isabel Tom. You've already heard from Ni-Quartelai, who gave some opening remarks, and from Daphne, our host. So Erwin Tan, he asked me to call him Erwin, but my goodness, medical doctor with training in both geriatric medicine and integrative health. He was born in Indonesia and a naturalized citizen of the United States. He has degrees from Brown University and the NYU, New York University School of Medicine. He currently serves as Director of Thought Leadership Health at AARP and previously served as a Director of Senior Core at the Corporation for National and Community Service, and as well as a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Erwin was also a White House Fellow serving as a special assistant to the Secretary of Veteran Affairs, and himself is commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserves. Wow. Ms. Isabel Tom is author of a book, The Value of Wrinkles, A Young Perspective on How Loving the Old Will Change Your Life. She's also a wife, daughter, mom, and forever grandchild who is passionate about serving the older population. She has over 35 years of experience with older adults and lived and worked with her grandparents, took care of her grandparents who lived until 98 and 102. And they had a profound impact on her life. Professionally, she has 13 years of experience working as at reputable healthcare organizations in the senior living and hospice care field, and she holds a master's in public health from the University of Maryland, College Park. So we're going to make this very conversational for the first 20-25 minutes, and I wanted to just start off with a couple of questions to either of our panelists. So this year, in terms of the pandemic and people staying at home, do you think that how has that changed how people are perceiving their roles and their responsibilities in a culturally fitting perspective in terms of their parents and caring for their parents? Would I open that up to either Erwin or Isabel?
Isabel, do you want or? Okay. I think that all of us have our own personal experiences. And for me, my mother turns 80 in 2 weeks. I did manage to see her this summer, but I probably won't see her over Thanksgiving. But she does live very close to my sister, who is the primary caregiver, along with my nieces and my nephew. And for me, it's it's been important to have continuous conversations. I mean, this is the theme of today that, Ni-Quartelai, Daphne, and you have mentioned. A conversation is about how to best care for each other during this time. In this time of social isolation, I think people need to remember that even though you're physically distant, you can still remain socially connected. And that's been a key part of this. One of the things that my mom has done actually is had that conversation with me, give me permission not to come for Thanksgiving. I think those are important considerations to have. And I think having those explicit conversations within my family is useful because there are times when my mom will compartmentalize information. She'll say something, oh, let me tell you about something, but don't tell your sister. And this is not the time to do that because it's really hard to communicate at a time when you can't be physically together. So I think that every family is different. For my mom and my sister has a multi-generational family. So she has a college student who is currently has spent time in college, at her boyfriend's college, in the basement, in quarantine. We have younger kids, and those are all things that we have to consider. But beyond this, I would say is remaining connected when you can, because the risk of social isolation, depression, is extremely high at this time, and those all compound the risk of COVID-19 infection, illness, and death. So as a community, to continue to talk to each other, reach out together, and try to support each other as family members and people who love each other. Isabel?
All right, can you guys hear me okay? I guess I'll just add a couple thoughts to that. I think language is a huge piece in serving, our elders. And so I think that is something that makes things a lot more complicated right now, especially if you can't be in the same place as your loved one. If English is not their first language, then it makes things very difficult. So I think it depends on what their health condition is. And like Erwin was saying, everybody has a different situation. So if your loved one is healthy, then it may be difficult, but if somebody is caring for somebody whose health is declining, it becomes a lot more difficult during this time. I would say that with COVID, I feel like I've seen a lot of caregivers kind of stretch their caregiving muscles because they're not depending on the typical, like, let me just show up physically, say hello, have a meal. They're just finding new ways to serve their elders. And I think that's really healthy because there is not one way to do it. And sometimes we just revert to the easiest things that we can do. And yeah, I think it just makes it very hard with the holidays coming up. But like Erwin was saying, I think COVID gives us an excuse to talk about some difficult topics, or just to open up some conversations and kind of generalize it and say, usually you might not be able to talk about certain topics, but now you can kind of blame it all on COVID and say, because of COVID, it's, they recommend that we talk about these types of things. And so I think it's actually a very good time to bring up some difficult conversations, especially about the future, when, a health episode occurs. If somebody goes to the hospital, who do you want to be, your advocate, your power of attorney, all of those things. Those are like some of the hardest things for caregivers to do, to have those conversations. But now you can just blame it all on COVID. So.
And I want to emphasize what Isabel said. I think that, to use this opportunity, another conversation you can have with your loved ones, especially your parents. I'm thinking about my own father and his death. There came a time when the care team came to us and said, "What do you want to do?" And luckily, my mom and my sister were able to say, "Well, we talked about this with my father, and this is what he would have wanted to have done." And I think those really difficult conversations are particularly hard, I think, for children. It was harder, I think, for me to say that than my mom, who had known him longer and more fully understood what he wanted. And so being able to talk to your parents and say, this is a decision that someone might ask me to make. And to be honest, it's going to be really hard for me to answer that, right? And so in asking your parents to have that conversation now, you can say, you would help me a lot if you could tell me what you would want now, so I don't feel the burden of guilt, because that's something that'd be really hard for me to live with. And I think having those explicit conversations, because I think, in my own family, a lot of things are sort of implied or not said. And sometimes when they're not said, I'm sure many people have had this. My father once, in a moment of great frustration with me, said, don't you have any sense of blah, 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 blah? And he said something in Bahasa Indonesian, and I'm like, don't even know what that means. But, so I think that's the time where those unsaid expectations need to be explicitly said. And I really agree with Isabel said, use this opportunity to have that conversation with your loved ones.
Wow, great, thank you. I wanted to just remind everyone, if you would like to add questions or comments to the chat, feel free. We will get to those questions at the end of the prepared remarks. In continuing with the conversation with Erwin and Isabel, you talked about using this opportunity to talk about some difficult conversations. Some of our attendees had asked about basically the different types of care that they provide personally, medical, emotional, physical, attending doctor's visits and things like that. You've also talked about providing support remotely, and you've talked about creative ways to kind of start conversations. Can you comment a little bit more about the caregiver's role in terms of between the two parents, possibly two sets of parents, and then also taking care of yourself as a caregiver? That seems to be a really broad theme for our attendees.
So are you referring to, I just want to clarify and understand your question. Are you asking the question, like, how do you handle all of that? Is that the
Yep,
question?
there's
Okay.
there's a lot. There's a lot of roles, and some of our especially Asian families have younger children and elders living with them. They have lots of different. They're distracted with a lot of different responsibilities.
I can just start off with that. So I'll just tell you, my kids right now are 4, 6, and 8. And when my grandma was, you know, she lived till 102 and my grandpa lived till 98. So most of my life has been spent being a caregiver. Both of my grandparents have passed now. But it is a lot of work. And I think when we were talking about conversations before, I think that's why it's important to have those conversations about future care, about what your parents want if something happens to them, about even, I mean, it's difficult, but even like, you know, talking about burial and, you know, the obvious things, obviously, about like your advance directives, who you want to make decisions for you. And I think it's important to have those conversations early, because what happens is if you're caring for your kids and then your in-laws and all these different people's, you are in a busy state, and it's really hard to slow down and have these really difficult conversations. The earlier you have it, number one, the less personal it is, the less intense it is, and your loved ones are able to think with more of a sound mind. And if you just think of a mom like myself who has 3 young kids, I can barely have a conversation with anybody that's serious. So if I have to talk about end of life issues with my kids hanging off of me, I mean, I either won't be listening to everything that my, you know, parents will be saying, or I won't be able to handle all those different emotions. I might get snippy, all those types of things. So I would say try and have those conversations early. If you are a parent and you have kids, then be very intentional about trying to set aside times. Maybe it's not just in one shot, but, you know, throughout the year, checking in with your loved ones and asking them what they want. Because when the time comes when their health declines, you're going to have to make decisions just like in a snap. And it will help you a lot if you at least have had some conversations and have a place to start.
You know, Isabel, I think everything you said was spot on. I have an 8-year-old, I mean, 8-year-old and a sorry, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and at least I'm not outnumbered with my spouse. So I think that you know, because people are so stressed and busy, I think all the various care opportunities we have, mental health is one I think that also needs to be emphasized, both for our the people we love and for ourselves who are caregivers. Thinking about my mom, she broke since talk about my mom. There's no HIPAA requirement, so I can tell anything. I can tell people anything I want. She broke both elbows last year, and I remember the frustration and the loss of independence, and you know, really having adjusting to this new disability that was temporary was really hard for her. Had that been during COVID-19, that would have been even more difficult. So I think that that's where people are finding themselves today. You know, there are risks. I mean, many people have postponed preventive care because there's an actual and sometimes perceived risk of knowing that when you go into a facility that has potentially patients that you are exposing yourself to potentially higher risk, and you know, and there's a notable risk for people in nursing homes and assisted care facilities. AARP does have some information on a guide by state level about what the status is within each state, and I can make sure to provide that as well. But it's hard because there are times when you know, we do know that the evidence seems to suggest, and I'm not giving medical advice here, that making sure that people get prompt care if they are if they are COVID-19 positive is important, right? And I think being afraid of the diagnosis is critical. I mean, thinking of when I was a physician in San Francisco at UCSF, people were afraid of the diagnosis of HIV/AIDS, so they would often delay getting a test until when they were positive, it would be often further along. And here, I think making sure that people have access to testing and feel comfortable with being tested, I think is an important piece, and that's something that we can encourage our family members to have in terms of opportunities for care. And also thinking about if someone is COVID positive in your own home, where would she or he stay? Would they? How could you sort of try to separate them from the rest of the house? And those are all very difficult situations, especially in areas where Asian Americans are overrepresented in urban areas where living space is limited. And I think also, as we think about the breadth of who Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are, many of our communities have serious issues of poverty. We know that, for example, the Marshallese community in Arkansas was experiencing a significant COVID-19 epidemic earlier in the year. So I think that the understanding that the various communities have different experiences, but those are all considerations as well. The final piece I would say is that Isabel mentioned language, and I think to also realize that our cultures, these barriers that we may experience because of our nationality, background, and culture, there are also aspects of our culture that also provide a lot of strength. Many people have experiences caregiving from an early age, and many people who may be the most proficient in English in the household may have had responsibilities in their homes that were not expected of most of their peers. And these are also strengths, opportunities for growth and strength. We even know that people growing up in bilingual homes, even if they're not bilingual themselves, have a better sense of theory of the mind. What is that other person thinking and talking about? So I think there are also strengths in our communities, and that's something to consider as well.
And I'll add to that, since I've worked in senior living for a good amount of time, a lot of the residents I used to work with, most of them were Caucasian. And so a lot of them would tell me, they would say, you are so blessed, because they would say, your culture cares for older people, and they really admired that. So I would say, coming from, immigrant families, you have an advantage, because maybe you don't feel prepared, but you've seen a lot of great examples. You've seen your parents, and you've in smaller ways, but you have it's a cultural value to value your elders. And I would say in senior care, that's like the one piece that so many senior care professionals want families to get. Like, you can learn about home care and hospice and all these different things, but to have family that cares for you, that's sometimes something you can't teach right away. So I would say to know that you're at an advantage.
In terms of the questions, one of them is what happens if your parents are far away. One of the things that I have done is actually we live in a neighborhood that's a sort of a naturally occurring retirement community here in DC, and we've reached out to our neighbors who are older and asked them, we give them our phone number and say, hey, can I have the phone number of your children? If something happens, please tell us. Or if we went shopping, we would say, hey, do you need anything? And having those similar relationships with the people around your parents are key. In terms of multitasking, my children are having virtual piano lessons. So when I want them to practice, I say, I want you to practice. I turn on the iPhone and I say, you're going to practice for your grandmother now. And so I'll put the phone in front of both an opportunity for my mom to connect and the children to be nudged into practicing. But I think, some people even I remember meeting this person who was a millennial, and she was far away from her family, and she would turn on the video conference and just leave it on so she could just hear her sister on the phone with her family. And sometimes she would say, I would hear all this bickering, but it sounded so normal and it made me feel happier. And I think those are ways in which we can keep the phone on, keep connected with people. But yeah, it is harder. So again, having that conversation with your loved one who's far away. I'm going to call you a certain amount of times, check in with me, text me. If I don't hear from you, what should I do? Who's the closest person that we could call if we were worried? Who's the name of your physician or nurse practitioner? What are your medication lists? So all these things, I think are conversations to have now.
I'm going to add to that again, but, sometimes people are afraid to breach those conversations, but I think to remember that our parents, they're not just scared. There's more to that. There are things that they're worried about. And even though it seems so, frightening to breach those conversations, you're actually helping them because they know that you're thinking about this too. And you almost give them a chance to, share with you what their worries are and maybe, what information needs to be shared. There's a large Chinese community center that I did talks for about end of life care. And I remember the first time I went there, I was thinking, I'm crazy. This is a bad idea. They're all going to yell at me because we're not supposed to be talking about death. It was the largest turnout we ever had, and they would not stop talking. A lot of these seniors were over 80 and they were thinking about this. Maybe they didn't talk to their own adult children about their future and their thoughts about what they wanted in terms of healthcare, but they're thinking about it. And I think sometimes we just need to be brave and give our loved ones the opportunity to share.
And the last thing I just want to add is also just echoing what Ni-Quartelai talked about in terms of the diversity within our communities. I remember one of the first patients I had as a resident at UCSF was a young man who was an Asian immigrant who was gay, and he officially wasn't out to his family, but his family knew. I mean, they knew, everyone knew, but no one was talking about it. But what precipitated an honest conversation and an acceptance, the family was very accepting, was an impending diagnosis that led to his death. And I think, I think that those are things that those are the conversations that early. And I know that's that can be hard. And there are parts of our community that are not as accepting about sexual orientation or LGBTQ issues and identity. And so everyone has to make their own decisions. But I think I want to acknowledge that that's also a difficult situation. Many people are moving in with their parents or with family, and so to be sensitive to that as an important issue within our community as well.
Great. Thank you for addressing the question that came up in the chat. There was one other that you kind of touched on, Erwin, is about people at different socioeconomic levels. So one of the questions we received from an attendee who registered was specifically, how do we take care of our parents without a retirement fund? And I'm assuming that's where the parents either don't have the resources or the child and children do not have the resources for the parents. So is there any resources or any insights that you can share?
I think the economic and social disparities in our country are significant, and I think we live, unfortunately, in a society where those have higher levels of impact on our health and healthy longevity than they should. I think looking at there might be some options. They may follow up, but there might be options within the AARP Prepare to Care guide. I think, and there are also some additional options that people may hear about on our website. But I think that those are all difficult questions. I think people, preparation for retirement is one of the things that we often talk about, and why we start our membership at age 50. As people age, it becomes harder. Options are more limited, but there are always options. And what I'll do is I can follow up with you. I'm not the expert on financial security, so I can follow up with you on that.
Isabel, any guidance? And you've been in the senior care where there's outside help, but I'm sure that doesn't come without expenses. So do you have any particular ideas or resources?
So it's interesting. When I served in senior living, the people who I served, they were obviously middle to upper class. And my grandparents, they were living at home and they didn't have the income to be able to live in a place like that. And I'll tell you that just because the residents that I served had more money, didn't mean they got better care all the time. Yes, they had more income, obviously. So things like food or healthcare were covered and were better. But I think for our loved ones who financially struggle, I think there are certain ways that we can work around that, if that makes sense. So for example, learning to work with, the physicians that you have. Maybe you can't choose the very, very best physician, but you can learn the questions that you need to ask to be able to make better decisions. So for example, being able to ask the questions, to be able to understand what your loved one's health situation is. So if your loved one ends up in a hospital, to really learn and figure out what is going on. Sometimes, maybe if you don't have a physician who takes the time to explain everything clearly to you, if you as a caregiver or the advocate or the adult child can ask the right questions, you will be able to make better decisions, and you will be able to provide your loved one with better quality of care. So for example, if you don't understand a term, if you don't understand something about the diagnosis, I think as in the AAPI community, we're known for being very courteous, sometimes reserved and polite. So I think sometimes we don't want to be causing trouble, so we don't ask questions. But I think these are the times where we really should ask questions, and that can help get your loved one better care. So I remember my grandma was in the hospital. She was 100. It was the first time she went to the hospital since she had a baby. So it was quite a while. And they diagnosed her at 100 with diabetes. Before that, they had to, they were going to do like different tests and things like that. And my grandma did not want to do it. They were going to do a CT scan. And first of all, you have to drink, I think, like this really gross tasting. Yeah, you can tell you're the doctor. All I remember is she just took a little taste of it and she was like, I am not doing this. So I thought to call one of my friends, who was a nurse, a colleague, and she told me to ask them, is this medically necessary for your grandma's age? So my grandma's 100. And when I asked that question, the doctor stood there and said, oh, actually, it's not really medically necessary. She's 100. This is not the only option. You don't have to just take this test. So I think when you ask questions, you can ask questions like, what are the other options? Sometimes sometimes the physician may not provide you with all the options. So finding out what all the options are, and then asking, what are the burdens and benefits of each? So you can find out more and kind of be an investigator. And then the last thing I would say is learning about hospice care, because hospice is covered by the Medicare hospice benefit, and it is one of the most generous benefits under the Medicare plan. And what it does is it provides care for somebody in the last 6 months of their life, and it's basically like a hospital on wheels that comes to a person's house to care for them. Obviously, it's harder during COVID, but the things that are provided under that benefit, even just like a hospital bed, which would cost a ton of money if somebody needed one, if you paid privately for that, it's covered under that benefit. So I think especially in the API community, and I've worked in hospice care education, like there's a lack of knowledge about these resources, and just to learn more about it in your area.
Yeah, to quote the late great Congressman John Lewis, it's important to paraphrase him. It's good to make, talking about causing good trouble. I mean, I think sometimes you have to do that.
Great. I'm going to open it up for Q&A from our audience, but I had one more question. It was really something, as I was reviewing all the questions that we got ahead of time, there seems to be a lot of interest and concern about not physical ailments, but dementia, mental health, mental wellness, and diagnosis of that. So how do we care for our parents in really having that conversation about emotional and mental wellness?
I would say that there is a stigma I've seen in my own family and in many other families on the issue of accessing mental health. But I think that it's an important consideration. Even the issue of social isolation, there's evidence to suggest that being lonely or socially isolated is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And as we try to all survive this year, I think it's important to consider that we're all grieving, and grief is a sort of a activity that I think is socially acceptable. There are a lot of culturally relevant ways that one grieves. But grief is not only about loss of a loved one, it's loss of anything significant. It can be loss of a job, loss of routine, loss of colleagues. And so the issue is grief is not only how you feel during this period of loss, it's how we can act within this period of loss to get through that and hopefully feel better. Because the idea is that if you're not able to grieve the way you need to grieve, you can get what's called complicated grief, prolonged symptoms of sadness, of inability to enjoy things. And those can be even more consequential for your health. So encouraging the people that we know and love to admit your own sense of burnout or sadness. Those are important considerations to take care of each other. But yes, I think accessing mental health is an important issue that our community in particular has.
And I would say very practically, I mean, if you're aging parent, you can see they're struggling with them. At least in my experience, I feel like in the AAPI community, especially for older adults, they're very resistant to getting, like going to a counselor or anything like that. And so I think if you are the adult child, just making sure the first step is that you can get that help, because there's caregiving is so complicated. I mean, there's you dealing with yourself and what you're processing, because as you watch your parents decline, there's a lot that you're trying to process, especially if their health is rapidly declining, especially if you're dealing with dementia and stuff like that. You are experiencing those losses of, as your parent is not acting the same way that they used to, all of those types of things. And so you need to have that space to help you process what you're going through. And that will help you at least to be a better caregiver. It's really hard to change other people's behavior. So, obviously if they are willing to, go for it, but more practically, like, get that help for yourself and don't be embarrassed about it, because it's going to be life-giving to you to be able to have that support.
Thanks, Isabel. I wanted to acknowledge a couple of you guys have unmuted yourselves at my request. So if you have a question for our panelists, feel free to go ahead and speak up. I see Isabel Ma, I see Sanya Tong Argao. And if you're able to unmute yourself and ask those questions, the remainder of the time, we have about 11 minutes left. Feel free to ask our panelists, and then I will be sending out links to all of you for AARP's web pages and a couple of the resource guides that they've collected for us. So one is local caregivers, what you can find in your state by state, and also the Prepare to Care guide, which is available in English and many Asian languages. So you'll have all those links. But questions? I'm going to call on someone. Isabel, did you have a question? Not Isabel Tom, but Isabel Ma. You're unmuted. Nope. Okay. Any other questions? Keith, do you have a question? Usually our program directors and our NAAAP leaders are full of great questions.
I mean, while we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to talk about, I think the issue of, if there's the issue of mental health within our community is, I think, an important one where I think Isabel was right in talking about taking care of yourself, and also in that way also modeling and trying to, if you feel comfortable being open about your own needs and how you've also experienced benefit, trying to maintain a sense of routine, regular physical activity, even opening up the window if you can, and having fresh air. Religious institutions for people who are religious are critical sources of comfort, and that may have been disrupted during the COVID pandemic. And that's where thinking about ways you can help your loved ones also access that connection to religious organizations, I think is key as well. But I think in thinking about how we have all adapted our own lives, trying to think about how we can also help our people we care for also have their lives as well. My mother just was recently told that she doesn't need physical therapy anymore because she's going to can do it on our own, in part because of the COVID-19 situation. So, but I have found that while my sister and I cannot often get my mom to walk, the kids, her grandkids are often primed. So if we do it outside in a way that's safe, they can walk together.
And I'll add to that, just I think it's a chapter in one of my books called Building a Village. And I think sometimes, especially if you're like the oldest adult male, you think it's like your job to take care of your aging parent. And that's a huge responsibility. So to remember to build a village, because you need help. And just like Erwin was saying, I was a grandchild who helped to take care of my grandparents. Grandchildren, I say, like, they bless without baggage. They're like a superpower. I mean, my parents could not get my grandpa to talk about or sign a power of attorney form. He was 97 in the hospital, would not do it. And then I was his favorite grandchild. So like, I was like, I think I can ask him. And when I asked him, he was like, sure, okay. So to really not just see yourself as just one person to care for your loved one, to really try and bring other people in. Right now with my kids, I have them call my mom, and my kids are ABC, American born Chinese, and so am I. And so I'm trying to teach them Chinese, but I want them to have the right tone and everything like that. So I have them call my mom, and she can, help guide them a little better. And so, our elders are the ones that kind of connect us to our heritage. So to see their value in being able to help us back too. And I guess I would add to that with Thanksgiving, if you're not able to be with your loved one, like, one idea is just to have your parent or grandparent teach you like a recipe or something like that, their special recipe. This is a great time to ask. And if it's a secret recipe, then maybe they'll be more willing to do it right now.
All right. We have a couple of questions. One is from Keith, who's going to speak in just a moment. But the first question I saw was, do you have any recommendations on how to deal with siblings, either rivalry or their cooperation in providing care? Those who are closer to elderly parents often are leaned on, but how do you share that load? And how do you ask other siblings to step up?
No, and I'm trying to be sensitive to that, being the sibling who lives further from my mom, and luckily AARP has a generous caregiving benefit. So when my mom had her accident, I took a week off, and during the week I was there, so to let my sister do what she needed to do, and then I would come back for the weekend. It's harder now, right? It's harder now, but um, um, and every family is unique in its own way. But and for that I defer to my sister who's on the ground, and I respect her opinion greatly. And so, yeah, that is again something to actually have probably an open conversation about. Isabel, you may have your own experiences as well on this, talking about this explicitly with your siblings.
Yeah, I mean, you can only share so much information, right? But every family is very complex, and yeah, it becomes a very difficult issue. I was a grandchild that took care of my grandparent, and my sister was the primary caregiver. She had 4 young kids and had my grandma living in her house. So, and that was to help out my parents because they were tired and stressed out from caring for my grandparents. And so, yes, there were other siblings, but I would say, number one, if you are the sibling who is not there, like Erwin was saying, to support the sibling who is closer, who is doing the more of the care. And to, sometimes you may feel like you have to step in, and when you go visit, that you have to just help with all the physical care and whatever, coordination and logistics. But think about that relationship between you and your sibling, and try and support and appreciate, get them a gift. Just that building that relationship is just as important as building that relationship with your parent. And it's going to support them in the long run, because there is always going to be one person doing more care. And it does seem very unfair, but the way you can look at it too is everybody has a different role. Everybody has a different gift. I may have been a grandchild and I didn't fill out the paperwork. You know, I wasn't the one who, might have been sleeping overnight every single night, but I was the one who was able to, you know, breach difficult conversations. I was the one who was able to, you know, I helped to wash my grandma's hair or do different things. We all have different gifts. And so I see this also with male, like siblings, with the female caregiver and then her sibling. And I've heard a lot of women or sisters say, like, how come my brother doesn't do anything? And so I think there's a couple different issues. Sometimes it's, they may think that you're better at it. And so they may not step in because they don't want, you know, I've heard somebody say, like, if I knew my sister or wife was going to do it, I'd let them do it because they probably do it better than me. So sometimes it's just like the feeling of not feeling equipped or like, able, you know, to do it well. And then I would also say, look at the way that you're relating with your sibling right now, and really try to work on that communication, because the way that this is practice for later on, because it will get harder, because as you near the end of life, there are going to be more intense conversations that you have to have. There are going to be more decisions that you have to make. And so consider this time as like a time to practice your skills and to stay connected. I think all of our parents, they want their children to get along. So, and if there are going to be disagreements, if you're going to have those disagreements and sometimes hard conversations, try not to have them in front of them, because that's also going to affect your parents as well. So hopefully those are just some helpful tips.
Thank you so much. Keith Nishida from NAAAP Pride Program has a question, and I'm going to ask him to unmute and go ahead and ask. Thanks, Keith.
Hi, Erwin. Hi, Isabel. Thank you so much for being here. And Daphne, if you're still listening. My question was revolving around people who are in their 20s or their late teens for that matter. And unfortunately, with COVID situations, our parents could pass at any time, I would imagine. So given the situation, what would you say to someone who may not be expecting their parents to pass, but that because they're in their late teens or they're in their 20s, maybe in their 30s, right? And their mind is around professional development and getting their life in order. If you have any advice around trying to not necessarily trying to convince them, but rather showing the importance of thinking ahead in terms of our older adults' care. If you have any thoughts around that.
I'm not sure like what your specific situation is, but this is what I tell people, because I don't think they realize it. For me, working in senior care, serving older adults, like I realized pretty quickly that people can die any day. And the person who looks healthier, I mean, you just never know, right? And especially now with COVID. So if you think of just before COVID, the average life expectancy, now I don't know if this is like the most up to date, but the average life expectancy of someone in the US is 78 years of age. So I think a lot of times we think there is more time. And I think that aging is just like, it's a sign for us to prepare that our loved ones are getting older, not just older, but they are nearing the end of life. And I think that number gives you more of a sense of urgency rather than thinking, oh, I've got forever. So my grandparents, they lived to 98 and 100, but I in working in senior care, I worked in senior care once I graduated from college. So I was in my 20s and I had this sense of, oh, they could go at any time. So I have got to treasure this time. And that's why I was so passionate about serving them, is because I knew through my work and the residents that I serve that I didn't know if I would have much time left with them. So I think just knowing that there is an urgency, sometimes just sticking a number to it helps, but I don't know your exact situation.
Appreciate that. yes, I think I'm coming from a place where a lot of our members are younger professionals, and kind of, at least from my perspective, figuring out a way to contextualize the topic of aging in place, or just aging gracefully, how we can express how important this topic is to our younger adult members, because I, for one, when I was in my late teens or 20s, I definitely wasn't thinking about retirement, or for that matter, how to care for my parents, because especially as a first generation Asian American, my parents immigrated, but my grandparents stayed in their home country, and I unfortunately didn't have a relationship with my grandparents. And so I, personally speaking, not am confident in terms of how to interact with aging family members, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it happen, but not personally. So
I mean, this is a plug for my book, but I wrote my book for the younger generation, because I was like, there's nothing out there. I wish there was something when I was, taking care of my grandparents that would help me, that wasn't, I don't want to say like written by my middle-aged mother type of thing, right? I wanted something that was somebody, a peer telling me this. And I think one of the issues is when you don't hang around anybody who's older than you, you just don't get that perspective. Like, there's no way for you to know. If you're hanging out on Instagram all day long, you're going to see the same type of people. But for me, like when I would go to work and then I would see, one of the residents that I served with an oxygen tube, or I would hear that his wife just passed away. Like, that was like a reminder to me, a very strong reminder to me to have that long-term perspective. And sometimes you just can't have it when our relationships are just with the same people. And that's why I think we always, having relationships with people that are different than us is so important. So read it, let me know what you think.
I love a good plug. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Yep.
Thanks, Isabel. I put the title of the book in the chat, and it's I put it in twice because it's kind of garbled in with our post-webinar survey. But I will send all of these resources, the web links, the survey, and the book title back out to all of you for who attended and those who registered and could not be with us today. Do we have any more questions for our panelists or for Daphne before we break? Okay. They are some of the most wonderful, generous speakers that I've had the pleasure to work with. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Erwin. Thanks, Daphne, for even suggesting this topic to us, and TDW and company for facilitating our connection and our partnership going forward. So NAAAP will be doing more with AARP in the coming months in the year. We have a partnership that will last us for a while. We have common interests and wanting to serve the Asian Pacific American community with the best speakers and really create a dialogue so that we can have the space, the time to talk about the important things that touch our lives, both professionally and personally. So with that, if there's any more comments, I think Daphne wants to say a few things.
Cyndy, I just want to thank everyone who took time out today to address this issue. It's so key and critical. Hopefully we'll be able to do more of these sessions. And for me, it was just wonderful to be able to see who's viewing this today. And I already touched base with Victoria Lee. We've already traded emails. We're going to set up a meeting because she's in elder care. And I'd love to learn about her work, and hopefully she can be a speaker for NAAAP on these issues as well too. So really thank everyone for joining us today, and especially to Erwin and Isabel, who are just wonderful thought leaders in this, and tremendous information, real life information for all of us to take. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see from the chat, everyone's very, very thankful. So any other comments? Okay. Well, we'll be taking this recording and sending it out to all of you. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And have a great week and weekend.
Stay
Happy
safe.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thanks for
safe.
having me, guys.
Bye.